The mirror doesn't lie, but some truths are too ugly to face. My reflection showed a stranger, a creature with hair hacked away in ragged clumps like a field after a locust swarm. My skin, once kissed by the prairie sun, was smeared with a grotesque mask of soot and grease, a cruel mockery of a woman. They had taken my husband, they were trying to take my land, and now they had taken my face. But as I stared into those haunted eyes, a flicker of the woman I used to be ignited a fire. They thought they had broken Josephine Holloway. They thought they had turned me into a ghost. They were about to learn that ghosts can haunt, and this one was coming back for everything they took. This is the story of how they tried to erase me, and how one man's quiet vow, "You're coming with me," became the first chapter of my revenge. The wind across the Cinder Creek Valley always sounded like a whisper. For the first 5 years of my marriage to Frank Coltrane, it had whispered promises. It rustled through the tall prairie grass on our ranch, the one his father had carved out of the wilderness, and left to him his only son. The Holloway Ranch I'd insisted on calling it after we married, joining my name to his land. He'd laughed, kissed the tip of my nose and said, "Whatever you want, Joe, it's as much yours as it is mine." That was the problem. In the eyes of his family, it was never mine. Frank died in the spring, a skittish new stallion, a sudden thunderstorm and a fall that snapped his neck clean. One moment, he was the vibrant, laughing center of my world. The next, he was a silent mound under a canvas sheet. The whispers of the wind turned mournful, carrying not promises, but the lonely echo of my own grief. The Coltranes descended upon the Holloway Ranch less than a week after we put Frank in the ground. His mother Matilda was a woman carved from petrified wood, her face a permanent sneer of disapproval. She had never thought me the daughter of a simple farmer, with no name to speak of worthy of her son. His brothers Gideon and Bo were two sides of the same tarnished coin. Gideon was barrel-chested and mean, with small, calculating eyes like his mother's. Bo was lankier, quieter, but with a casual cruelty that was somehow more unsettling. They sat in my parlor, the parlor Frank and I had furnished with a settee, ordered all the way from St. Louis, and drank my coffee while passing judgment on my life. "This is a lot of land for one woman to handle," Matilda began, her voice thin and sharp as a needle. "Far too much." "I'm managing," I said, my hands clenched in the lap of my black morning dress. "Managing?" Gideon scoffed a dark stain of coffee on his thick mustache. "The north fence is down in 2 places. We saw 3 head of cattle wandering toward the ridge. Frank would have never allowed such a thing. I've been occupied with burying my husband," I replied, the words tasting like ash. "Sentiment is a luxury, Josephine," Matilda said, setting her cup down with a sharp clink. "Ranching is a business. This ranch, the Coltrane Ranch, needs a firm hand. It needs family." "It has family," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It has me. Frank left it to me. His will was clear." A dark look passed between Matilda and her sons. The will. Frank had insisted on having Judge Peterson draw it up the year before, clear and ironclad. Everything went to me, his beloved wife. It was his final act of protecting me from them, and they knew it. "A piece of paper," Bo mumbled into his cup, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "Paper burns." Their visits became a regular torment. They would ride over unannounced, pointing out every perceived flaw. A loose board on the porch, a patch of withering corn in the garden, a horse that looked a bit thin. Each comment was a small, sharp jab intended to wear me down, to make me feel incompetent and alone. They offered to help, their offers always laden with the unspoken threat of taking over completely. I resisted. I woke before the sun. my body aching with grief and exhaustion, and I worked. I mended those fences Gideon had mentioned, my hands raw and bleeding. I rounded up the stray cattle, my voice hoarse from calling them. I learned to bargain with the traders in redemption, gulch my jaw set stubbornly against their attempts to lowball the grieving widow. The land was my last connection to Frank, and I would sooner die than let them pry it from my grasp. My only neighbor to the west was a man named Wyatt Garrison. His ranch was smaller, nestled against the granite teeth of the Dragoon Mountains. He was a mystery, a man who kept to himself. I'd see him sometimes from a distance, a tall, solitary figure on horseback, moving with a purpose that seemed unshakable. He never came to town, socials never drank at the saloon. The talk in Redemption Gulch, fueled by Mildred Peterson at the general store, was that he'd come from somewhere back east, after some great tragedy, buying the old Miller place, and speaking only when necessary. He and Frank had shared a nod when their paths crossed a silent respect between men who understood the land. But he was a stranger to me. One sweltering afternoon in late August, as I was struggling to replace a rotted post on the corral, the coal trains appeared on the rise. 3 riders silhouetted against the unforgiving sun. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This felt different. There was an air of finality about the way they rode, slow and deliberate, like buzzards circling their prey. I stood up, wiping sweat and dust from my brow with the back of my glove, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was no friendly visit. This was a reckoning. They didn't bother with the pretense of conversation. Gideon and Bo dismounted their boots, kicking up clouds of dust as they strode toward me. Matilda remained on her horse, a grim monarch overseeing the dirty work of her court. "That's enough of this foolishness, Josephine." Gideon grunted, his shadow falling over me. He grabbed the post-hole digger from my hands and tossed it aside. "You're done playing rancher." "Get off my land," I said, my voice trembling but firm. I took a step back, my hand instinctively going to the small utility knife on my belt. Bo chuckled a dry, rasping sound. "Still feisty?" "Mama, she's still feisty." "We're here to help you pack," Matilda said, from her perch, her gaze as cold as a winter morning. "You're leaving. A woman like you has no business here. You've brought shame to the Coltrane name long enough. The only shame this family has is sitting on that horse." I shot back my fear, giving way to a surge of defiant anger. That was my mistake. Gideon's face darkened. Before I could react, he'd lunged his big hands, grabbing my arms. I cried out, struggling against his iron grip, but he was immensely strong. Bo moved in a length of rope in his hand and quickly bound my wrists behind my back. They dragged me kicking and shouting toward the small lean-to where I kept my tools and supplies. "What are you doing?" I screamed, the panic clawing at my throat. "Let me go." They threw me to the ground inside the dusty, shadowy space. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Gideon stood over me, his face flushed with exertion and malice. Bo leaned against the doorframe, casually pulling a pair of heavy sheep shears from a hook on the wall. The rhythmic snick-snick of the blades, opening and closing, filled the sudden silence. "Mama said, you need to be taught a lesson," Bo said, his eyes gleaming. "You need to be shown what you are. You ain't a Coltrane, you ain't a rancher, you're just nothing. A stray we're running off." Gideon forced me onto my knees, yanking my head back by my long brown hair. It was my one vanity, thick and wavy, falling past my shoulders. Frank had loved my hair. He used to run his fingers through it as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The cold metal of the shears pressed against my scalp, I squeezed my eyes shut, tears of terror and humiliation streaming down my face. "No," I pleaded the word a ragged whisper. "Please don't." The shearing began. Great hanks of my hair fell away, landing in the dust around me. The sound was brutal, a violent metallic scraping that seemed to echo in my skull. Gideon laughed as he worked his rough hands, tearing and pulling. He wasn't just cutting it, he was mutilating it, leaving jagged, uneven tufts. Each snip of the shears felt like a piece of my identity being stripped away, a violation that cut deeper than any blade. When he was done, he shoved me forward. I fell onto my hands and knees, choking on sobs surrounded by the shorn locks that had once been my pride. "That's better," Gideon grunted. "Now you look the part of a beggar." But they weren't finished. Bo came forward, holding a bucket of axle grease he'd taken from beside the wagon. Mixed in it was soot he'd scraped from the forge. He knelt beside me, a cruel grin on his face. "Every animal on a ranch needs a brand," he said softly, his voice a venomous hiss. "So people know who it belongs to. Or in your case, who it doesn't belong to." He scooped up a gob of the black, foul-smelling sludge with his bare hand. I tried to twist away, but Gideon held my head fast. Bo smeared the grease across my face, rubbing it in with brutal force. It filled my nose and mouth, the acrid taste making me gag. He worked it into the ragged stumps of my hair, caking my skin, blackening my tears. It was an act of profound degradation. They weren't just trying to drive me away. They were trying to unmake me, to turn me into a monster, a pariah that no one in Redemption Gulch would dare to help or even look at. They were branding me as an outcast. Through the black haze of grease and tears, I saw Matilda still mounted on her horse, just outside the lean-to. She hadn't moved. She had watched the entire thing with a look of grim satisfaction. Our eyes met, and in hers I saw no pity, no humanity, only the cold, triumphant glint of victory. They left me there, a sobbing, defiled heap in the dust. Gideon threw the shears down with a clang. "The wagon leaves for the east in the morning," he snarled. "Be on it. If we find you on this land tomorrow, we'll do more than cut your hair." They mounted their horses and rode away, their laughter carried back on the wind that now seemed to mock me. I lay there for a long time, the world a blur of pain and shame. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the familiar landscape of my home became alien and threatening. I was alone, disfigured and broken. They had taken everything. All that was left was a raw primal agony that slowly, as the cold of the evening set in, began to curdle into something else. Something hard and cold and dangerous. Rage. Darkness fell completely, and with it came a chilling silence that was more terrifying than the Coltrane's laughter. The world had shrunk to the dusty floor of the lean-to, and the throbbing pain in my scalp and my soul. I didn't know how long I lay there, lost in a stupor of shock and despair. The will to move had deserted me. What was the point? Where would I go? They had made me hideous, a creature of the dark. The thought of anyone seeing me like this was a fresh wave of agony. A sound cut through the night, the soft thud of a horse's hooves on dry earth, approaching slowly. My heart seized. They had come back. They had come back to finish the job. I scrambled backward, crab-walking deeper into the shadows of the lean-to, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My back hit the rough-hewn wall, and I could go no further. I curled into a tight ball, making myself as small as possible, and waited for the end. The hoofbeats stopped. I heard the creak of saddle leather as a man dismounted. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crunched on the gravel outside, coming closer. A large silhouette filled the doorway, blocking out the starlight. It wasn't Gideon's bulky frame or Beau's wiry one. This man was taller, broader in the shoulders. He stood there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. "Mrs. Coltrane," a low voice called out. It was a voice I didn't recognize, deep and steady. I remained silent, pressing myself harder against the wall. He took a cautious step inside, and a stray moonbeam caught his features. It was him, Wyatt Garrison, my reclusive neighbor. His face was stark, all sharp angles and shadows with a stern set to his mouth. His eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to see everything. His gaze swept the small space and finally landed on me, huddled in the corner. He didn't recoil. He didn't gasp. His expression didn't change at all, but a stillness came over him, the kind of stillness a predator has right before it strikes. He took in the hacked hair, the blackened face, the shorn locks scattered in the dust around me. His eyes lingered on the discarded sheep shears. He looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his gaze. Not pity, but a cold, hard anger that seemed to burn away the shadows. He understood immediately with no explanation needed. The quiet fury in his eyes was more validating than any words of comfort could have been. I finally let out a choked sob, the sound torn from my throat. They... I couldn't form the words. He didn't press me. He simply unhooked a canteen from his belt and walked slowly toward me, crouching down a few feet away. He unscrewed the cap and held it out. "Water," he said. His voice was gravelly, like stones tumbling in a riverbed. My hands were still bound behind me. I just stared at the canteen, my whole body trembling. He saw the rope, and his jaw tightened. With a sigh that sounded more like a growl, he set the canteen down, pulled a formidable-looking knife from a sheath on his hip, and in one smooth motion stepped behind me and sliced through the ropes. The sudden release of my arms sent a jolt of pain through my shoulders. I brought my hands around to my front, rubbing my raw, chafed wrists. He stepped back, giving me space, and gestured again to the canteen. I picked it up with shaking hands and drank the cool water, a balm to my parched throat. We sat in silence for another minute, the only sounds my ragged breathing and the chirping of crickets outside. He wasn't looking at me with disgust or horror. He was looking at the injustice of it, at the evidence scattered on the floor. "Who?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The Coltranes," I whispered. "Matilda. Her sons." He gave a single sharp nod. He stood up his tall frame, seeming to fill the entire lean-to. He looked out the doorway toward the dark, empty house, then back at me. I was a mess of greased dirt and despair, my spirit shattered into 1,000 pieces. I expected him to offer condolences, to say he'd fetch the sheriff, the useless platitudes people offer when they don't know what else to do. He did none of those things. His decision was swift and absolute. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable but his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact, a command, delivered with an authority that stunned me into silence. He wasn't asking for my permission. He was telling me what was going to happen next. He was taking control because I had none left. He reached down not to touch me, but offering a large, calloused hand. For a moment I hesitated. To take his hand was to trust a stranger, to step out of the ruins of my life and into an unknown future. But to stay here was to surrender, to let the Coltranes win. I looked from his steady hand to his unwavering eyes. In their depths I saw a reflection of my own simmering rage, a shared understanding of a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering sanctuary, a starting point. I placed my filthy hand in his. His grip was firm and sure. He pulled me to my feet with surprising gentleness, and without another word, led me out of the dark lean-to and into the cold, clear light of the stars. Wyatt Garrison's ranch was as Spartan and severe as the man himself. The house was a simple, sturdy cabin of hewn logs, chinked tightly against the wind. There was no garden, no paint on the porch, none of the small touches that had made my house a home. It was a fortress, not a hearth built for survival, not for comfort. He led me not to the main house, but to a small, clean bunkhouse nearby, likely for a hired hand he didn't have. Inside, a single cot was made up with clean, coarse blankets. A small stove stood cold in the corner, and a washbasin and pitcher sat on a crate. "You can stay here," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the bare room. "No one will find you." He lit a lantern, and the warm glow pushed back the shadows. It also illuminated the full extent of my desecration. In the unforgiving light, I saw my reflection in the small, cracked mirror hanging by the door. A monster stared back at me. A gasp escaped my lips, and I turned away, shame washing over me anew. Wyatt saw my reaction. He walked to the mirror, and without a word turned it to face the wall. It was a simple, profound gesture of kindness that struck me more deeply than any flowery words could have. He left and returned moments later with a bucket of hot water, a bar of harsh lye soap, and a clean towel. He placed them by the basin. "There's a change of clothes on the cot," he said, gesturing to a pair of men's trousers and a plain cotton shirt. "My wife's. They've been packed away. They might fit." The mention of a wife hung in the air. It was the first piece of his past he'd ever revealed, however unintentionally. It explained the deep, abiding sorrow that seemed to cling to him like dust. He paused at the door. "Bar it from the inside. I'll be in the main house. Yell if you need anything." He closed the door behind him, leaving me in the lantern's solitary glow. The hot water was a miracle. It took ages to scrub the thick, stinking grease from my skin and out of the butchered remnants of my hair. The lye soap stung, but it was a clean pain, a purifying one. With every layer of soot I washed away, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I washed until my skin was raw and red, but clean. Dressed in the strange, oversized clothes that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, I finally felt something other than pure violation. I felt shielded. I slept for 12 straight hours, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion. When I awoke, the late morning sun was streaming through the single window. Outside, I could hear the rhythmic thwack of an axe splitting wood. For the next few days, a quiet routine formed. Wyatt would leave a tray of food, simple fare like biscuits, jerky, and strong black coffee on the bunkhouse porch at dawn and dusk. He never intruded, never asked questions. He gave me the one thing I needed more than anything, the space to heal. I spent my time in solitude. I paced the small room. I stared out the window at the imposing granite peaks of the mountains. And I looked at my reflection. I had forced myself to turn the mirror back around. The woman staring back was still a stranger. Her hair was a boyish, ragged mess. Her eyes were shadowed with trauma, but she was clean. Her face was her own again. And in those eyes the fire of rage was banking, glowing hotter and more focused. On the 4th day, I couldn't stand the confinement any longer. I unbarred the door and stepped out into the bright sunlight. Wyatt was by the corral working with a powerful roan horse, his movements economical and sure. He saw me, and for a moment he stopped, his hand resting on the horse's neck. He gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, then went back to his work. I walked over my borrowed boots, awkward on my feet. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. For everything." He didn't turn around. "No need for thanks." "Your wife's clothes," I said, plucking at the soft fabric of the shirt. "I can wash them and keep them." He cut me off, his voice tight. He finally turned to face me. His face was a mask of granite, but his eyes held a deep, ancient pain. "Her name was Mary. The clothes are no use to her now." The story came out in clipped, reluctant pieces over the next few days, not in a single conversation, but in fragments shared over a shared meal or while mending a harness. He and Mary had a small farm back in Missouri. Bushwhackers, remnants of the war, who had turned to banditry, had come through. They'd wanted his horses. He fought back. They killed Mary and their young son Daniel in the crossfire. Wyatt had survived, but he had hunted down every last one of them, a grim, solitary quest for vengeance that had hollowed him out. Afterward, he'd sold the farm and ridden west, seeking a place where the ghosts of his past couldn't follow. He had come to the Cinder Creek Valley, seeking solitude, and instead, he had found my pain. As he spoke, I understood the source of his quiet fury. He had seen the same brand of senseless, cruel violence inflicted upon me that had destroyed his own life. He wasn't just helping a neighbor. He was standing against an old, familiar enemy. "They think I'm gone," I said one evening, as we sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sky bleed purple and orange. "They told me to be on the morning wagon. They'll assume I was scared off for good." "They'll come to check," Wyatt stated, his eyes fixed on the horizon toward my ranch. "When they see you're not there, they'll take it. They'll move their cattle onto your grazing land. They'll move into your house, and Sheriff Brody will sign whatever paper they put in front of him." "He's in their pocket," I confirmed bitterly. "Always has been." "The law won't help you," Wyatt said. It wasn't cynicism, just a statement of fact. There's only one way to deal with men like that. I looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, etched by grief and violence. I thought of the shears of Matilda's triumphant gaze, of Beau's cruel whisper. The fear and shame that had crippled me were finally burning away, leaving behind a core of cold-tempered steel. They had wanted to turn me into nothing. Instead, they had forged me into a weapon. "So we fight back," I said the words, feeling powerful and true on my tongue. "Not with the law, with our own rules." A flicker of something respect perhaps showed in Wyatt's eyes. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "We fight back." Our fragile alliance was sealed. It wasn't built on affection or friendship, not yet. It was a partnership forged in trauma and bonded by a shared thirst for a justice that no court could provide. We were two loners, two scarred survivors united against the gathering dark. Our war against the Coltranes began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Wyatt was a strategist, his mind, as sharp and unforgiving as the landscape he inhabited. He knew a direct assault was suicide. We were two people against a family with money, influence, and the law on their side. Our strength lay in the shadows, in our knowledge of the land, and in the Coltrane's own arrogance. "They're overconfident," Wyatt explained one night, sketching a map of the two ranches in the dirt with a stick. "They think you're gone. They think they've won. We use that. We make them feel haunted." Our first target was their water. The Cinder Creek, which gave the valley its name, was the lifeblood of both our ranches. But a smaller seasonal stream, fed by mountain springs, cut across a corner of Coltrane land before joining the main creek. It was a crucial water source for their largest herd. Under the cover of a moonless night, we rode out, Wyatt moving with a silent grace that spoke of a dangerous past, showed me how to build a simple, temporary dam of rock and packed earth, just enough to divert the stream's flow a few hundred yards to the west, where it would soak into the dry arroyo instead of feeding their watering hole. It was hard, back-breaking work, my muscles soft from my life as a rancher's wife screamed in protest. But with every rock I heaved into place, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. I was no longer a victim hiding in a bunkhouse. I was an agent of retribution. The effect was not immediate, but within 3 days, it was undeniable. From a high ridge on Wyatt's property, we watched through an old spyglass as Gideon and Bo rode frantically around the shrinking, muddy watering hole. Their cattle, thirsty and agitated, were lowing in distress. The brothers argued, gesturing wildly, their confusion and anger, visible even from a mile away. "They'll blame the drought," Wyatt said, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. "It'll take them a week to realize the stream has been tampered with. A week of their cattle losing weight. A week of them working twice as hard to drive the herd to the main creek." Our next move was against their fences. We didn't cut them down, which would have been an obvious act of sabotage. Instead, we worked along the northern boundary, the one bordering open range. Methodically, patiently, we pulled the staples from 24 posts, just enough so the wire looked intact, but would give way under the slightest pressure. That night, Wyatt used a technique I'd never seen. He took a long leather thong and tied a cluster of dried gourds filled with pebbles to it. He crept toward the resting Coltrane herd, and from a safe distance hurled the makeshift rattle into their midst. The sudden, terrifying clatter in the dead of night sent a wave of panic through the cattle. The herd surged, a blind stampede of fear, hitting our weakened fence line. The wires snapped from the posts, and 200 head of Coltrane cattle scattered into the vast, rugged wilderness of the open range. The following days were pure chaos for the Coltranes. They had to abandon all other work to round up their scattered livestock. They lost cattle to gullies, predators, and sheer distance. Their frustration mounted. We heard from Mildred Peterson, the town's ever-reliable source of gossip, when Wyatt made a rare trip for supplies. "The Coltrane boys were in here yesterday." She'd told him, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Meaner than cornered rattlesnakes, cursing their luck. Gideon said it feels like Frank's ghost is paying them back for..." Well, he didn't say for what. That news sent a thrill through me. We were becoming ghosts' whispers on the wind. We were turning their own superstitions against them. We kept up the pressure with small, unnerving acts. A gate left open here. A pile of rocks mysteriously appearing on a trail there, forcing them to take a long detour. One night I snuck close to their ranch house, closer than Wyatt was comfortable with, and tied a thin, taut cord to the latch of their chicken coop. I ran the other end to a sapling, creating a tripwire. The next morning, their flock of chickens was scattered across the yard, and Bo spent hours chasing them down, cursing the unseen forces he believed were at work. During this time, the dynamic between Wyatt and me shifted. We were no longer just a protector and a victim. We were partners. He taught me how to track, how to move silently through the brush, how to read the land. I, in turn, started to bring a semblance of life to his stark existence. I began tending to the small garden Mary had planted long ago, which had since gone to weed. I found her old sewing kit and mended his worn-out shirts. We rarely spoke of our pasts, but a silent understanding grew between us. We were two broken pieces that, when placed side by side, created a stronger whole. My own transformation was profound. The ragged hair, which I'd started trimming into a more deliberate, short-cropped style, no longer seemed like a mark of shame. but a symbol of my new life. My hands, once soft, were now calloused and capable. I had learned to handle Wyatt's spare Winchester rifle, and my aim was becoming steady. The fear was still there, a cold knot deep in my gut, but it was now overshadowed by a resolute purpose. The Coltranes, however, were not ones to be tormented for long without hitting back. Their paranoia was growing, and their anger was seeking a target. They started riding the boundaries of their property, daily armed and alert. One afternoon, Sheriff Brody rode out to my abandoned ranch. Wyatt and I watched from our perch as he tacked a notice of forfeiture to my front door, claiming the property was abandoned and subject to public auction, an auction everyone knew the Coltranes would win. The legal maneuver was a sign they were tired of the haunting and were moving to solidify their victory. It was an escalation. "They're getting impatient," Wyatt observed, lowering the spyglass. "And impatient men make mistakes." His words proved prophetic. That evening, as dusk settled, we saw two riders heading not for their own ranch, but for Wyatt's, Gideon and Bo. They weren't riding with the aimless frustration of cowboys looking for strays. They rode with grim purpose, rifles resting across their saddles. They had grown tired of chasing ghosts. They had decided to hunt the living. "Get in the house," Wyatt commanded, his voice low and urgent. The casual ease he normally carried had vanished, replaced by the coiled intensity of a wolf sensing danger. "Stay away from the windows." I didn't argue. I ran to the main cabin, while Wyatt moved swiftly toward the barn, disappearing into its deep shadows. I barred the door and grabbed the Winchester he had left propped against the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden heavy silence of the evening. Through a small crack in the chinking, I watched the two riders approach. Gideon and Bo didn't ride directly to the cabin. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, their figures stark against the twilight sky. They were scanning the property, their suspicion a palpable thing. They knew. Somehow they knew I was here. Perhaps Mildred Peterson's gossip had traveled further than we thought, or maybe their own malevolent intuition had led them to the only other soul in this part of the valley. "Garrison!" Gideon bellowed, his voice echoing across the yard. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." The lie was so blatant it was almost laughable. Men who wanted to talk didn't come with rifles drawn at dusk. Silence was their only answer. "We know she's with you," Bo shouted, his voice higher, laced with a nervous energy. "The lying tramp Josephine, send her out. This ain't your fight." From my vantage point, I saw a flicker of movement in the hayloft of the barn. Wyatt was in position, Gideon dismounted, holding his rifle ready. "We saw your tracks heading from her place, Garrison. You helped her. You're harboring a thief. Her ranch is Coltrane land now, and she's got no claim." He took a few cautious steps forward. Bo remained on his horse, a nervous sentinel. Suddenly, Wyatt's voice boomed from the barn, seeming to come from the very air around them. "This is my property. You are not welcome here. Turn around and ride out." The disembodied voice startled Gideon. He spun around, aiming his rifle toward the barn. "Show yourself, coward. The only cowards I see are two armed men come to threaten an unarmed one," Wyatt's voice replied, dripping with contempt. "Though I suppose you have experience with threatening the unarmed, don't you?" The barb hit its mark. Gideon's face contorted with rage. He raised his rifle and fired a shot into the wide-open hayloft door. The report of the gun was deafening, splintering the evening quiet. That was the only invitation Wyatt needed. A tongue of flame erupted from a different opening in the barn, a side window, and the rifle shot's echo was answered by another. The bullet didn't hit Gideon, but it kicked up a spray of dirt just inches from his boot. Gideon yelped and scrambled back behind his horse for cover. Beau panicked, raised his own rifle, and fired wildly at the cabin. The shot went high, thudding into the log wall just above my head. Splinters showered down, and I flinched, my grip tightening on the Winchester. This was real. The games were over. Another shot cracked from the barn, this one precise and deadly. It struck Beau's horse in the flank. The animal screamed a terrible high-pitched sound and bucked violently. Beau was thrown from the saddle, landing hard on the ground with a grunt. His rifle flew from his hands, skittering away into the dust. "Beau!" Gideon roared. He fired again at the barn, providing cover, while his brother scrambled to his feet, dazed and winded. This was my chance. They were both focused on the barn. Wyatt was keeping them pinned down. With trembling hands, I pushed the barrel of the Winchester through the crack in the chinking. I centered the sight on Gideon's broad back as he crouched behind his horse. My finger found the trigger. I thought of Frank. I thought of my hair falling in the dust. I thought of the black grease on my face. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, the sound deafening inside the small cabin. My shot was not as practiced as Wyatt's. I didn't hit Gideon, but I hit his horse. The animal screamed and collapsed, trapping Gideon's leg beneath its weight. He roared in pain and fury, struggling to free himself. Now they were both unhorsed, exposed. Beau, unarmed and terrified, made a run for his fallen rifle. "Don't," Wyatt's voice commanded from the barn. Beau froze, his eyes wide with fear. He looked at his brother, trapped and cursing under the dead horse, then at the dark, menacing barn, and then at the cabin from which a second rifle had fired. He was caught in a crossfire. The fight went out of him completely. He raised his hands high above his head. "I give," he squealed. "Don't shoot, I give." Wyatt emerged from the barn, his Winchester held loosely, but ready. He walked calmly toward the two brothers. His face was like a thunderhead, dark and dangerous. I unbarred the cabin door and stepped out, my own rifle held steady. When Beau saw me, his jaw dropped. He wasn't looking at a broken, weeping victim. He was looking at a woman with short, cropped hair, wearing men's clothes, holding a rifle with the practiced ease of a soldier. The sight of me, whole and defiant, seemed to terrify him more than Wyatt's bullets. Wyatt reached the trapped Gideon and kicked his rifle away. He looked down at the snarling, pain-filled man without a shred of pity. "Your brother is smart," Wyatt said, his voice dangerously soft. "You should listen to him more often." He then turned his cold gaze on Beau. "Get him out from under that horse." Working together, a terrified Beau and a grim-faced Wyatt managed to heave the dead animal enough for Gideon to pull his leg free. It was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Pain had bleached his face pale under the grime. We had them, both of them. One injured, one terrified into submission. We marched them not to the bunkhouse, but to the small windowless root cellar behind Wyatt's cabin. It was cold, dark, and smelled of damp earth. As I barred the heavy wooden door, Gideon's voice, tight with agony, came from within. "You'll hang for this, Garrison. Both of you, Mama, will see you hang." I leaned against the cellar door, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, leaving a deep tremor in its wake. Wyatt stood beside me, reloading his Winchester with methodical clicks. "He's right about one thing," Wyatt said, quietly, not looking at me. "Matilda won't let this go. She'll bring the whole town down on us if she has to. This isn't over." "I know," I replied, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my hands. "But now we have something they want. We had her sons. We had hostages. The whispers on the wind had turned into a roar, and the final bloody reckoning was now unavoidable." The morning broke cold and grey, mirroring the grim reality of our situation. We had 2 Coltrane brothers locked in a root cellar. One was badly injured, his groans a constant grim reminder of the violence of the previous night. We couldn't keep them here forever. Matilda would raise an army. "She'll go to Brodie," I said, pacing the floor of Wyatt's cabin. "He'll deputize half the town and ride out here guns blazing. They'll call it a kidnapping. They'll have the law on their side." "Then we can't let them tell the story," Wyatt replied. He was cleaning his firearms with an unnerving calm. "We have to tell it first, in public, where she can't twist the truth." His plan was audacious and incredibly dangerous. We wouldn't wait for the posse to come to us. We would ride into Redemption Gulch with our prisoners in tow and force a public confrontation. We hauled a sputtering, terrified Beau from the cellar. Gideon, his face ashen with pain from his crudely splintered leg, was in no condition to ride. "You're our insurance," Wyatt told Beau, lashing his hands to the saddle horn of his own horse. "You will tell everyone exactly what you and your brother did to Josephine, everything, or I will leave you for the buzzards and deal with your mother myself." Beau, thoroughly broken, nodded frantically. The ride into town was the longest of my life. I rode beside Wyatt, my Winchester, resting across my lap. Beau rode between us, a miserable captive. We were a strange, forbidding procession. As we reached the outskirts of Redemption, Gulch heads began to turn. Doors opened. People stared from the boardwalks, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. We didn't stop at the sheriff's office. We rode directly to the center of town, stopping in the dusty street right in front of the Redemption General Store, the hub of all town life. Mildred Peterson's face appeared in the window, her eyes wide as saucers. A crowd began to gather. "What's the meaning of this garrison?" a voice boomed. Sheriff Brodie pushed his way through the crowd, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. His face was flushed, his eyes darting from us to Beau. Before Wyatt could answer, a wagon came rumbling down the street at a furious pace. It was Matilda Coltrane. She must have ridden out to my ranch, found it empty, and then, in a panic, discovered her sons hadn't returned. She had come to town to fetch the sheriff, only to find us waiting for her. She pulled the wagon to a halt, her face a mask of disbelief and rage when she saw her son tied to a horse. "Beau, my boy, what has this creature done to you?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That's enough, Matilda." Wyatt's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. It silenced the growing murmurs of the crowd. He dismounted, moving with a calm deliberation that commanded attention. He turned to the crowd, his voice clear and strong. "You all know Josephine Coltrane. You knew her husband, Frank. What you don't know is what happened to her after Frank died. You think she abandoned her ranch. You're wrong." He looked at me, a silent cue. My heart was pounding, but I met his gaze, drawing strength from it. I dismounted, and with my hand shaking slightly, I pulled off the wide-brimmed hat I wore. A collective gasp went through the crowd. My short, hacked-up hair was a shocking sight in a time when a woman's hair was her crowning glory. "Ask them," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I pointed at Matilda, and then at the miserable Beau. "Ask them what they did to me. Ask them why they came to my ranch and held me down. Ask them about the sheep shears." A heavy, stunned silence fell over the street. "Lies!" Matilda screeched, her composure cracking. "She's a lunatic. A harlot who drove my son to his death and now tries to steal his land." "Is it a lie, Beau?" Wyatt said, turning to the captive. He drew his knife, the same one he'd used to cut my bonds, and rested the tip gently against Beau's cheek. "Tell them," Tell them what your mother ordered you to do." Bo was trembling like a leaf in a storm. He looked at his mother's furious face, then at the cold steel of Wyatt's knife, and finally at the expectant faces of the townsfolk. He broke. We did it!" he stammered, tears streaming down his face. "Mama made us. She said we had to scare her off. We cut her hair. We blackened her face. We told her to leave or we'd kill her." The confession landed like a physical blow. The crowd stared at Matilda, their curiosity turning to horror and disgust. Sheriff Brody, who had started to move toward Wyatt, stopped dead in his tracks, his face pale. "And Frank's will?" I called out, pressing the advantage. The one Judge Peterson drew up, leaving everything to me. I think if you search the Coltrane house, you'll find Matilda has a different version. A forgery. This was a gamble, a guess, based on her relentless greed. But it hit home. Matilda's face went white. She knew. We all knew. "Doctor," Phineas Albright stepped forward from the crowd, his face stern. "Matilda, is this true? By God, tell me this boy is lying." Matilda Coltrane, cornered and exposed, did the only thing a venomous creature can do. She lunged for a rifle she had stashed in her wagon. "You will not take my family's legacy." She screamed, her eyes wild with madness. She was fast, but Wyatt was faster. He didn't draw his pistol. He simply moved, shoving Bo's horse aside and closing the distance in 2 long strides. He grabbed the rifle barrel as she tried to swing it toward me, wrenching it from her grasp with a sharp twist. He tossed it aside, and it clattered in the dust. Matilda, disarmed and defeated, stared at the faces around her. She saw no support, no sympathy. She saw only judgment in the eyes of the people she had tried to rule through fear and influence. Her power, built on a foundation of lies and cruelty, had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. She let out a strangled sob and collapsed onto the wagon seat, a broken old woman. Sheriff Brody, seeing which way the wind was blowing, finally acted. "Matilda Coltrane," he said, his voice weak but official, "you're under arrest. For assault, for conspiracy, for everything." The reckoning was over. The truth, once brought into the light, had been a more powerful weapon than any gun. Bo was taken into custody, and a party was sent to retrieve the injured Gideon. The town, now firmly on my side, buzzed with the scandal. I stood in the middle of the street, the dust settling around me. Wyatt walked over to me. He looked at me, at my short hair, at the fire in my eyes, and for the first time I saw him smile. Not a thin, grim line, but a real small smile that reached his eyes. "The Holloway Ranch is yours again, Joe," he said. The wind picked up blowing dust down the main street of Redemption Gulch, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a mournful whisper. It sounded like freedom. My home was waiting for me, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I would not be going back alone. The story of Josephine Holloway isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to be erased. It's a story about how the deepest scars can forge the strongest wills, and how even in the most lawless of times, true justice can be seized by those brave enough to demand it. From the depths of humiliation, a warrior was born, not by picking up a gun, but by refusing to stay broken. Her journey, and the quiet, steadfast man who stood by her side, reminds us that true strength isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. If this story of resilience and reckoning in the unforgiving West captured your imagination, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of the Wild West. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.